Briahna, what's on your radar?
Well, Robbie, today I ask, are Democrats trying to cancel the Democratic primary? Well, at least one Democratic booster wants them to. A self-described influencer known as Politics Girl went viral last week with a TikTok embodying everything wrong with establishment Democrats. Take a listen.
Listen, Democrats, can we please stop talking about primarying Joe Biden? Who should run against Joe Biden? Will Democrats get behind Joe Biden? This many Democrats want an alternative to Joe Biden. Can we just not? The absolute last thing democracy needs right now is a Democratic primary. We're in late-stage capitalism with a corrupt Supreme Court on a knife's edge between autocracy and democracy, and people want to spend $100 million to undermine our successful incumbent when the alternative is the twice-impeached criminal ex-president or the man who is single-handedly turning Florida into a fascist dictatorship? Why? I know people are excited for fresh young leaders with bright new ideas, but those fresh young leaders will never get a chance if we don't protect democracy now.
Politics Girl, aka Lee McGowan, goes on to say that Biden has accomplished more in 2 years than any president ever. More than FDR, more than LBJ. And instead of making any attempt at all to back up that big claim by naming a single solitary accomplishment, she appeals to Biden's decency and pivots to his thoughtful staff who have plans for the future of women's rights, gay rights, and voters' rights. No details on what those plans may be. Again, no specifics are offered beyond claims that Biden supports a higher minimum wage and lower healthcare costs. Of course, we are in the longest period since the advent of the minimum wage without a minimum wage raise. 7 Democrats voted against a $15 minimum wage in 2021. And Biden made it clear during the pandemic, no less, that if Congress did manage to pass universal health care, a plan which 88% of Democrats and 49% of Republicans support, he'd veto it. But the implication of Lee McGowan's approach is clear. As long as Biden is seen to be better than his Republican counterpart, even incrementally, Democrats shouldn't ask whether he's the best America has to offer, or more importantly, whether any other candidates are better for them and their interests. Now, this video seems to be an obvious dig at Marianne Williamson, who to date is the only Democrat to challenge Joe Biden's presumptive run. Lee offers a much softer touch than the women of The View, who had this to say about Marianne Williamson recently.
So now I'm not feeling her crystals and her aura.
Okay, you know something, a couple of things. Number one, Marianne Williamson has the sense of humor of this cup.
And despite being slightly more subtle than the women at The View, this video still was deeply triggering to lots of leftists who, I argue, are triggered because they have a better understanding of how power and corruption work in this country than liberals, and consequently see the constant push to vote blue, no matter who, as part of an incentive structure that produces underwhelming candidates who betray their campaign promises and, most importantly, betray the working class. And the hypocrisy is nauseating. Politics Girl stresses the importance of environmental protections. And while it's true that Biden made some marginal progress by undoing Trump's anti-climate orders and passing certain climate investments via Build Back Better, his recent drilling grant in the Arctic, known as the Willow Project, directly contradicts his promise not to drill on federal lands and will produce as much carbon dioxide as is released by 65 coal-fired power plants each year, or 51 million gas-powered cars over a 30-year span. It's a move backward from 2050 net zero emissions goals, and it directly threatens the health of local communities who will be sacrificed on the altar of big business, just like the residents of East Palestine. Still, Politics Girl insists that we must vote for Joe Biden, stressing of all things his foreign policy leadership. Let's listen to a little bit more if you can stomach it.
It could be argued that the biggest reason democracy is winning in this David and Goliath story in Ukraine is because Joe Biden had the foreign policy experience and humility to gather world leaders together and build a coalition to support them. He can run on all of that. We don't need to replace him. We need to spend our time and money giving him a bigger majority in Congress so he can get even more accomplished.
What a pitch. Look, this particular point is hard to swallow in light of reports that the U.S. has repeatedly attempted to undermine peace negotiations in Ukraine since Russia's invasion a year ago. Reports that we've been credibly accused of attacking the energy infrastructure of a major ally in order to force them to commit to fighting with us to the last Ukrainian, that's Nord Stream, of course, and the fact that China's Xi Jinping visited Moscow this week to negotiate peace with Putin, while Biden rejects the possibility of a ceasefire. But I doubt any of these arguments would carry much weight with Politics Girl. Her theory of change was made clear in that last segment. To the extent Biden has not lived up to expectations, it's because, in her view, he lacked sufficient majorities in Congress. If Democrats just vote harder, they'll be blessed with an even better Biden the next time around. Or so the saying goes. Now, this reasoning holds only if you trust the underlying premise that Joe Biden wants to do better, but his hands are tied. Yet if you pay attention to the corrupting influence of money in politics, you'd realize that the problem isn't that good guy Democrats are outnumbered by bad guy Republicans, but that too many folks on both sides of the aisle are more committed to their donors' interests than their constituents' interests. There's basically no relationship between what the people want and what Congress does, not because the people are divided from each other, but because elites in Congress are divided from workers by their class interests and their corporate commitments. Biden's straight up telling Democrats he'd veto Medicare for all, a policy with 88% Democratic approval, and corporate media acolytes don't seem especially interested in connecting the dots as to why, between the lobbying dollars and the bipartisan oligarchy's agenda. Unlike liberals, leftists understand that politicians rely on so-called rotating villains within their own party to tank legislation when they technically have the votes to pass something. See, for example, Manchin and Sinema in the first 2 years of Biden's presidency. Or else they blame their inaction on fake parliamentary blockers like the Parliamentarian, someone who none of us had really heard of until 2021. That being the case, what sense does it make to follow Politics Girl's advice to simply vote a little harder? Obama had a filibuster-proof majority, but lo and behold, there's always a Joe Lieberman-type figure to the rescue. Now, Politics Girl does something liberals love to do, appeal to so-called facts on paper that apparently prove how great Biden is. The reason people don't like him, according to this logic, isn't because of any failing of his own, but because of, quote, lying propaganda networks selling us on the idea that he is a demented, evil pedophile trying to run the country. Holy straw man, Batman. Now, I have my issues with Biden, but I assure you, none of them are that I think he's a pedophile. That's nowhere near the top of my list. If we just want, I'm sorry, healthcare, please, sir, we have a little bit of healthcare. I mean, Politics Girl could at least pretend to engage with the material concerns of a disaffected working public, but she won't. Look, Politics Girl isn't wrong about the stakes here. Republicans are banning Toni Morrison and trying to bring back child labor to loosen a tight labor market in which workers actually have a little bit of power right now, and to pass a federal ban on abortion. Won't somebody think of the children as right? But as I asked Noam Chomsky once in a viral pre-2020 election interview, when does all of this vote blue no matter who finally end? What are the long-term consequences of everybody on the broad left, Democrats, liberals, everyone, saying that under any circumstances, we will vote for a Democratic candidate as long as they are incrementally better than the Republican candidate? Does that way of thinking contribute to the rightward shift of the Democratic Party over years? And what mechanism will ever stop that shift if we're not willing to ever, under any circumstances, leverage our votes?
What you're saying, if you think it through, is we should help Trump win because maybe in the long run, that'll affect the Democratic Party. That's a terrible choice. Helping Trump win, as you're proposing, would mean 4 more years of destruction of the environment, getting possibly to tipping points, which would be irreversible, certainly making any effort to deal with it very difficult. It would mean stacking the judiciary with young, ultra-right lawyers, top to bottom, so that nothing would be possibly done for a generation.
Now, reasonable minds can and did disagree here, but I did not feel I got a satisfying answer. I do not think it's satisfying to be told that you're helping Trump win, because every 4 years there's going to be some Trump-like figure for whom their election will yield real consequences, negative consequences for a left agenda. And like Politics Girl, Chomsky seemed unwilling to contend with whether validating a system that, according to experts, is completely untethered from real democracy, a system which in fact fails to represent the people in the least, is part of the problem. Democrats at this point are openly admitting that they will not allow a real primary. They've moved the South Carolina primary deadline, which Biden won handily with an assist from Jim Clyburn, to make his victory seem like a fait accompli. And the DNC may not allow Williamson to even have the opportunity to debate Joe Biden at all. The anti-democracy ethos is coming straight from the top of the administration. The White House press secretary confused the mic at her press podium for a mic at a Comedy Cellar when asked about whether Democrats should clear the field for Biden, joking that she'd be able to answer the question better if she had a crystal ball. Lots of original Marianne jokes here. But it takes no great powers of prediction to guess what will happen if the Democratic Party continues to abuse its base. Only 12% of Democrats want Biden to lead the party. In 2016, Democrats ignored a deeply unpopular candidate and, according to Democratic insider Donna Brazile, rigged the race against Bernie Sanders. And to what effect? What happened in 2016? Meanwhile, the right has a much higher tolerance level for ideological diversity. Its right flank forced to the vote over the House Speaker and won powerful concessions that left electeds should be envious of. But they're not. Instead, House progressives who once claimed to center issues like universal health care have pre-endorsed Biden before Biden has even committed to running. When I asked Representative Ro Khanna why on a recent episode of my podcast, Bad Faith, this is what he had to say. It's still so early in the game. Why commit, I would argue, prematurely to voting and endorsing for Joe Biden?
I said that the person I would support would be Bernie Sanders, but given that he has said that he's not running, I think that the president has done a lot of things that have been more progressive than I anticipated. I mean, the climate bill that he ended up passing, the sense that the Build Back Better, even though it didn't get passed for universal child care, $15 wage. So I think he has won confidence from a lot of progressives in adopting significant chunks of Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders' his agenda. And I'm going to support him for re-election. That said, some of the attacks I've seen, at least online, on Marianne Williamson are totally beyond the pale. I mean, a democracy should have competition, and if someone wants to run on ideas, that's their right.
Now, I appreciate him saying that Marianne has the right to participate in a primary, but my goodness, that's a low bar. I hate to say it, but all of that, Biden exceeded expectations talk sounds an awful lot like a softer version of what Politics Girl has to say. And I think it's no accident. Politics Girl simply distilled the vote blue, no matter who logic that has led to a Democratic Party that no longer pretends to care what its constituents think. Just suck it up and vote. Chomsky told me that not voting gets you Trump. It's possible, however, that voting for corporate candidates on both sides of the aisle guarantees that the best we can ever hope for is only incrementally better than that. And I'm afraid that too many Americans can't survive incrementally better than the status quo for much longer.
Well, look, I do agree with you that the whole kind of how is it? What's the threat of having someone challenge Biden? I mean, he is overwhelmingly likely to be the Democratic nominee for president again, no matter what anyone on the left does. So challenging him, putting a little bit of pressure on him to have different policies if you want him to have different policies. This is no threat to the Democratic effort to battle Trump or to battle DeSantis. It's no threat whatsoever. So it's very silly to see people like the people you're calling out here get worked up about something that will hardly make it would be a drop in the bucket. Hardly make any difference at all.
Yeah, with all due respect to Marianne Williamson, and I really very much hope I'm wrong about this, but if Bernie Sanders, with his popularity numbers and his kind of name recognition and all that he had going for him, wasn't able to get the job done, the idea that Marianne presents such a threat that they have to kind of openly mock the idea of democracy and try to kind of openly undermine the primary process, it really does a lot to undermine the credibility of Biden's potential run and candidacy here. So it seems to me that all signs would point to the direction of just being gracious and open and saying we welcome Marianne into the contest and let it burn out on its own if that's what's going to happen. And so it begs the question, why all of this concerted opposition? Why all of the mocking? Why all of the pushback?
I think Biden, or the Biden side, because it's not really him doing this, but the Biden coalition looks weaker and more vulnerable that they get so worked up about something like little old Marianne Williamson.
Yeah, well, maybe that's an opening for her. Maybe that bodes well for her in the long run. We'll have more Rising for you after this.